I got to sit down with Catlin Tucker, best-selling author, international teacher trainer, and EdTech pioneer, to talk about education in the exponential age. She gives us her advice for teachers, parents, and students. Take a look. What do you see as the fundamental role of education?
To prepare students to be successful in life. I mean, that I want them to have the skills, the confidence, the curiosity to be successful for whatever comes next, whether that's a career, if that's the decision to go to college. But my concern is that the learning is so disconnected from what is going to come next. All of these different situations they're going to find themselves in. And I worry that because they're not learning in a way that's connected to what's next, that they are going to really struggle to apply whatever they learned over here in these pockets over here.
Mm-hmm. So if you're talking about preparing students for success, I would totally be curious to hear how you are defining success for your own kids.
For my own kids, I am very aware that when they move into their what's next, right? They move into the work and career world, that they're not going to have a single job, that they're going to potentially have a range of different jobs. And success for me, for my own kids, is that they're passionate, they know what they're passionate about, and they have the skills to be adaptable. So they can start here, but they can get over here because of their own resourcefulness, their ability to continue learning, exploring, and growing once they've said goodbye to whatever institution they spent their years at.
Well, I guess if there's a recommended shift in the coursework, the subject matter, what is the recommended shift?
Well, that's what I spent the last 2 years trying to do at the school I was at. I mean, what I wanted to do was to break down those walls. I wanted to embrace a co-teaching model where you had a collection of ideally 3 at least educators who are credentialed in a range of things. So I'm credentialed in English and tech, and then a woman who I was working with was credentialed in science and English, and then we had a gentleman who was credentialed in history. And the idea was that we would build units around big ideas that hopefully kids care about, nutrition, social media, mental health. And then everything that we tackled from a literary perspective, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, from a historical perspective, from a science-based kind of perspective, all was related to these kind of big umbrella topics. And yet students were very much driving the learning because it was very project-based.
Sure.
So for me, that is within the current structure we have, which is limiting. That was a way in which to try to anchor what we were teaching in the real world, show the connections between the various subject areas, and then let the students decide, what lens do I want to look at nutrition or social media or mental health through, and let's go interview actual experts. I'm not the expert on any of those topics. I have my areas of interest. I do my own reading, but they can find experts in the field. We can bring them in, Skype them in for interviews. They can have Twitter chats with them. It's not like they are relegated to a book or even an online search.
So what can high schools or colleges and universities do to stay relevant?
I think that if you are not, and this is very kind of grounded in the culture that you create on a school, in a school campus, in a district, but if you do not have a robust professional learning community where at every single level of your institution you are committed to ongoing learning, supporting that learning, experimentation, failure, iteration, there's just no way you're going to be able to keep up. And I worry that there are not structures of support in place and there are not resources being allocated to building that professional learning infrastructure that is so necessary if we are just even going to nip at the heels of the change that's happening for that real change to take place in classrooms. I just don't know that we're investing in learning, which is crazy that in institutions of learning, we are not investing in learning at all levels.
Yeah. So we've got technologies, we've got virtual reality, augmented reality, we've got access to the internet, we have a lot of new tools that are coming to the education space that you're helping educators to understand. What are the ones that you see as most promising, most inspiring, creating the shifts that are needed?
Oh, I mean, I'm excited about all of it. I am super excited about the potential of virtual reality for sure. The idea that students could experience a moment in time, that they could actually interact with something. You know, we're so limited, even if I think of science classes, limited by what they can do, by what's physically in a classroom. And VR has the potential to kind of make all of those limitations go away.
Yeah.
It's not a cheap technology,
No.
which is limiting in and of itself, but the idea that kids could have those real experiences. And I've done in my doctoral studies some research on brain science and neurobiology, and kind of interested in this idea that, you know, part of what we hear, or I've heard as an educator, is that when kids are stressed, they can't learn. So the whole social emotional piece is so important. But in moments of acute stress or excitement or fear, you actually encode information really well. So part of me wondered, gosh, if they're learning about a moment in history that's, you know, really intense and they're in a VR experience, could that actually help them to remember that? You know, so there's just some interesting ways in which the brain works and this technology works, that if we're kind of joining kind of what we know about learning with what they're discovering about how the brain functions, I think some of this technology could be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, the idea to immerse yourself in an experience like that. I mean, you can do the black and white, left to right reading in textbook about signing a Declaration of Independence, but to be teleported into that moment, so much more of your brain is engaged. I mean, the sense of your location in the room, right? The interaction between people. I have to imagine that that's really going to create a much more, not only increasing memory, right, but just a much more meaningful experience of history, or of witnessing photosynthesis, or of, you know, these kinds of things, right? I'm excited about that. What advice do you have for parents?
I mean, I can only speak from I'm sorry, I just slammed the microphone, so you'll probably hear that.
No worries.
So in terms of my advice for parents, as a parent, I think I am very aware, as a parent and an educator, I am aware of the limitations of the traditional school system. And so I feel it is my job to supplement in a very robust way what my kids are getting at school, whether it's things I want them to read, experiences I want them to have, whether, you know, I remember a moment when Cheyenne came home, gosh, it was 2 years ago, and she said, "I don't like science." Like what? She's so curious. She loves to experiment. She's constantly making a mess in our house. She likes science. But whatever's happening in her classroom is leading her to believe, you know, science isn't for me.
I see.
And so then I, of course, was like, no, this is not happening. I'm getting, like, you know, the little monthly science kit coming. I got this Couve system from Sony where you build and you program and you make things move. And I was just like, no, I want you to have the experiences with building and coding and making, so that you realize science isn't just what's happening in this classroom with these worksheets, in this book, this static experience. It is this very active, engaging experience. And it was funny because she was choosing her course list for 6th grade, selected STEM. STEM is her elective. So, but that fell on me as a parent to know, okay, what is going to appeal to your kids? And if they're not getting it here, how am I making sure I'm connecting with them with the opportunities over here? Although that's a very privileged parent place to come from. I can afford to do that. I can, you know, I have the awareness as an educator to be able to do those things. And I know that there are parents who, you know, they work evenings, they work their tail off, they don't have those connections to those things, and they might not be able to offer those kids those opportunities. So it's about being aware, but I do know that there are limitations to what some parents can do for their kids.
True, yeah. But this is good guidance.
Yes.
The situation going on around student loans and the expense of college education, is this a dying model? Are schools closing? What's happening? It's like enrollment. I'm not on the stats. What's happening?
I don't think it's a dying model at all. I mean, if you listen to high school students trying to get ready for college or trying to apply to college, what I hear is it's so hard to get into any college right now. It's so competitive to get into any school.
Wow.
Our valedictorian is going to UC San Diego, which is a great school, but like it's not Stanford, it's not, you know, so just the competition to get into schools is higher than ever. I actually think one of the things that frustrates me about higher education is it is actually functioning to reinforce the status quo in a sense that students feel it's all about the grade. It's not about the learning, not about is this grade an actual reflection of what I'm learning. It's about the grade, it's about the GPA, it's about as many AP courses as I can take. And AP courses, those teachers are under immense pressure to cover all this information and get a certain score on the test. So does that leave a lot of room to be innovative and play around with your instruction and how you deliver and how you engage? No. So I worry that like kids, they don't want to take a chance on a program like the one I described earlier because they're like, I don't know how that's going to go. Is that going to get me college ready? Am I going to get that 4.7 I need when I'm applying to schools to get into a decent one? So dying model, I think not.
Wow.
No. Yeah.
That's crazy. Well, so we've talked about from the perspective of an educator, from the perspective of a parent. What is your advice for like a high school student, college student right now?
Do what you love. Pursue that passion. One of the things that always kind of alarms me when I talk to my high school students about what are they going to do after school, a lot of their conversation revolves around how much money I'm going to make. This is the job I want because I want to make X number of dollars.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to laugh because here I am. I stumbled into education, fell in love with it, and from being a teacher, have had all of these other opportunities open to me because I am so passionate about what I'm doing.
Totally.
So it doesn't matter what you think that check is going to look like. Follow that passion and know that we live in a time where you can create opportunities for yourself. You can connect on social media. You can share ideas that are globally accessible. Like you can create your own path, but start from a place of passion.
Wow. Okay, this conversation might get a little bit longer than I had anticipated. Well, because you just touched on something that's really been meaningful to me, which is this idea of how important it can be to just get into what lights you up.
Yep.
Find your passion. There's like in terms of defining success for my own kid, that's right there. That's what it's about. The struggle is, I mean, you spend your entire like young career in the classroom, your exposure to figure out what you're passionate about, to find out what drives you to, really, it's so limited. I'd be very curious to hear from you how to solve that problem, that lack of exposure to being able to see what lights me up. And then I don't know, are you familiar with one example of one program like this is Leap Now out of Calistoga?
We talked about this.
Yeah.
Yes.
So tell me, how do we fix that problem?
I mean, I would just love to see schools embracing teaching design models that welcome outside folks in and allow students to leave the campus, to have, externships and get into companies and spend a week learning about how these people do their job. I mean, I can talk all day to students about the skills that I think from my scope of experience that they need to be successful in life, but go tuck into a business for a week. Be the person, running errands and watching and documenting that. I mean, what a cool way to see, wow, these people have to do this and they have to do that, and oh, that looks cool, or oh, I'd never want to do that. Like, let's start making decisions from a place of experience, because I know when I was a kid and I was thinking about what I wanted to do, it was like what my parents did. That's it.
Sure.
And I mean, I certainly never thought I was going to be a teacher. I spent enough time in classrooms where I was like, no, I'm never going to do that. And then, the world is a funny place. So it's about exposure and experience and living in it and seeing what you'd want to do. For years, my team of teachers before that program I piloted, we would do a career exploration project. And it was very minimal, but they had to do X number of observational hours. They had to interview 3 professionals in the field. And the takeaways that came from that experience were a lot of kids who were like, I didn't realize if I was going to be a baker, I was going to have to be up at 4 a.m. and I was going to have to do X, Y, or Z. And it was just a real dose of this is what the world is like. And I don't think that they get that.
I mean, you've done such a great job with your own kids in your international travels and creating experiences that provide exposure. I mean, like back to like making recommendations for parents. I have suggested, I don't know if this is insane, that parents take their kids to like the premier conferences for events. Like if they were thinking about education, you want to get them to the ESD conference or something along those lines. Is that something you've explored?
I've never taken them to a conference, though I attend a lot, and Cheyenne, my daughter, thinks that she wants to be a teacher and a writer because that's what I do, right?
Yeah.
And she loves to write, and so it's definitely in her area, her wheelhouse of interest. So I think a conference could be like an exciting exposure. I do think that having her actually like when it comes time to think about like, yeah, this is what I want to do, getting into those environments where that job is happening.
Right.
And you want to be a writer? Okay. You set up your computer in my office and you do the 2 hours of writing when I'm working on a book every day that I do, and see, do you like it? How does that work for you? Like, obviously she's a student, so she sits in the seat of a student, but you want to be a teacher? Shadow a teacher for a week. See what that experience is like.
Well, I mean, is that, so I totally think that's correct, but like, how do you facilitate that? I mean, remind me, how old is Cheyenne?
11.
She's 11, right. So go shadow a teacher, right? Great instruction. How do you get that done, right? I mean,
I think you have to be proactive. I would be using my contacts as a parent to say, hey, my kid is super interested in this. I'd love to have her shadow you. What are the and a couple, so she can get some different perspectives.
Yeah.
11's a little young. I mean, she could decide she wants to be a gymnast next week, and who knows what could happen. But when she's in high school, oh, for sure. And I'm going to be the first person in the summer. Are you going to a camp that's relevant to this area of interest? Are you doing some kind of an internship? How are you really exploring these fields of interest? One of the other messages I would love for parents to hear, if parents watch this, is one of the areas of challenge for me as an innovator and educator trying to push change in our current challenging system is that often the parent and educator feels like a very adversarial relationship, which is odd, for me. I want to be a team working for the betterment of your child. But I think parents are also, just like higher education, real drivers of the status quo. Peter Senge said that in an interview, and I was like, he's so right. Like, every time I try to push the boundaries of what's expected, parents tend to push back. Why are you doing this? Because it doesn't look how the learning that they experienced look. And they're very suspicious of anything new. And part of me just wants to like scream, but everything's changing. How can this space stay the same?
Yeah.
So when working with parents or talking with parents, I think it's so important to explain why we're doing things.
Yeah.
What is the value proposition for kids? But I would really encourage parents to think about, like, does your kid enjoy going to school? Does school light them up in any way? And if the answer is no, then that school needs to change something, and the more you can support that, the better.
Yeah, and do you really, I mean, if you're looking around at how much things are changing, do you really want the education that you had to look identical to the one that your student's having, your child is having?
But it's like, it's comfortable, they understand it, so box checked. In a traditional class, typically, teacher assigns assignment, students go home and they complete it in isolation. They come back, they hand it to the teacher, physically or digitally. Teacher goes home and grades it and assesses it in isolation. So where is the opportunity for a conversation about these students and their skills and their progress?
Yeah.
Because the kids, for the most part, are not really analyzing the feedback that they get on whatever, it's like, oh, that's my score, done. Moving on. There's zero incentive for them to want to do anything with all these comments that you just spent all this time putting on there. So I have been using blended learning models to move assessment and feedback back into the classroom, in the classroom where I believe it belongs, which means you grade a whole lot less, you focus on assessments, you focus on feedback during the process so that there's an incentive for them to use that feedback to continually improve.
Yeah.
And so there are specific strategies, and then I started having kids doing weekly self-assessments. What have we done this week? Look at the standards. Which skills does this work kind of align to? Where do I think I am at based on this thing that I created if I'm looking at this, and every standard is tied to a rubric? Okay, I'd put myself at like a 2 out of 4, and this is why, and here's my narrative explanation. So the whole idea is that if we start to partner with students on assessment, if we use blended learning models so that we don't have to stand up and talk all the time and cue every transition, then we can actually move that piece, which so many teachers resent and loathe, into the classroom, where it becomes this very rewarding experience, and it's so much more valuable for kids.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's my next book.
I dig that. Well, so I guess I wonder,
And the topic of my dissertation, probably.
if in this book or in your dissertation or as you create talks around this, I mean, what you just said sparks in my mind to think, I'm becoming aware of how there's a disconnect, not only in the specific piece that you just talked about, but in how people work in office spaces and in business realities versus I go in isolation and throw this over the wall. I don't do anything like that. I mean, the organizations that I've worked for, though typically have been smaller, are so matrixed.
Really?
I mean, there's so much cooperation, and it's not like you work and work and work, culminate, over the wall. No, it doesn't work like that. I have to work with subject matter experts. I have to work with people who do product management. I have to work with senior executives. I coordinate across so many different, you know?
Well, and you are drawing from other people's strengths. You're complementing other people. You're negotiating with personalities that maybe aren't in line with your personality. And that is a piece when I talk about project-based learning with educators. Some of them are like, well, students don't really like working together. Okay, but this is like a life skill. You're not, just because you don't like working with other people, they slow you down, they irritate you, whatever. That's not how life works.
Yeah.
I can't think of, unless you truly are a solitary writer, and then you're still negotiating with your editor when on all the little changes. I'm like, where do you in life just get to do your own thing without constant interaction and collaboration and compromise and cues from other people?
Yeah.
It doesn't exist, except in this artificial world we've created called school.
Huh.